I always believed that family meant trust and support, but I never thought they would scam me out of $118,000. I stared at my laptop screen, the glow of the banking app casting a dull blue light in the dark room. It was past 1 in the morning, and my wife, Emily, was asleep upstairs. I should have been in bed too, but something had been gnawing at me for weeks. Now, as I scrolled through my account history, the truth slapped me in the face. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars, month after month, gone. Not on bills, not on vacations, not on anything I or Emily had spent. No, this was money that had slowly bled out to my family. Well, mostly my sister, Megan. And it hadn't been a few hundred here and there like I'd convinced myself. No, this was a pattern, a steady drain. Like paying rent for a place I didn't even live in. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. I wasn't stupid. I knew family helped each other out. That's how we were raised. But staring at those transactions, the sheer number of them, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. This had never been about family. This had never been about love. It started small, like all bad habits do. A call from Megan, her voice tight, saying she was short on rent that month. She was a single mom, her ex-husband long gone, and she just needed a little help. I didn't think twice. I had a good job, a stable income, a few $100. No big deal. Then, a few weeks later, another call. Her car broke down. The repair bill was more than she could handle. I sent more money, telling myself it was a one-time thing. But that was the problem. It never was. The requests kept coming. A medical bill here, an unexpected fee there. Megan had a way of making it sound urgent, like the world would collapse if I didn't step in. And I wasn't just her brother. I was the successful one, the one who got out, made something of himself. And wasn't that what family did? Look out for each other? At first, it felt good. I was the dependable one, the one Megan could count on when things got tough. But the more I helped, the more it felt like an obligation, like it wasn't optional anymore. And the worst part, Mom had backed her up every step of the way. I should have seen it coming. The first time I hesitated, even slightly, Megan didn't just let it go. She got Mom involved. "She's your sister, Derek," Mom had said, her voice laced with that special kind of disappointment only mothers can pull off. "She's struggling, and you have the means to help. You're doing this for family." That last part always got me. Doing it for family. It made me feel like saying no would make me some kind of monster. Like money was the only way I could prove I cared. And Mom, she knew exactly how to phrase it, how to twist it just enough, so that saying no wasn't an option. So I paid again and again and again. But now, staring at my bank statement, the weight of it all hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just helping. I was being used. And the worst part, I had let it happen. The latest withdrawal had been just 2 days ago, another rent payment from Megan. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the desk as anger simmered beneath my skin. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I had any left. I shut my laptop, tapping my fingers against the desk. This had to stop. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Because to my family, Mom, Megan, this wasn't borrowing anymore. They saw it as something I owed them, and that scared me more than anything else. I should have seen it coming. Megan never did anything without a plan. So when she called me one night and suggested making things easier, a fixed amount sent to her every month instead of these random requests, it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. At first, it was $700. Just enough to keep things stable, she said. No more last-minute calls. No more stress. A set number I could budget for. It felt like I was getting some control back. I convinced myself this was a smarter way to handle things. That lasted about 3 months. Then out of nowhere, it was $900. Things are getting more expensive. The guilt trip followed immediately. My niece needed school supplies. Groceries had gone up. It's just temporary, she promised. And because I'd already been paying, what was another couple hundred? My hesitation lasted about 5 seconds before I caved. By the time it hit $1,100, I wasn't even surprised. It was always the same routine. A slight pause on my end, a long silence on hers then. I didn't think you'd let your own family struggle. Then the closer, Mom calling the next day, making it seem like the obvious thing to do. Family looks out for each other. No one ever outright said, I was a bad person if I said no, but they didn't have to. And then, for the first time, I actually did say no. It wasn't even a big deal, or at least, I didn't think it was. My niece's birthday was coming up, and Megan wanted me to drive 5 hours to their place for the party. I had a packed week at work, deadlines that couldn't be moved. So I told her I couldn't make it, but I'd send a gift instead. The response was instant. Too instant. Like she had been waiting for an excuse. Wow. I guess we know where we stand. At first, I thought she was joking, but then silence. The kind that made me check if the call had dropped. Then, before I could even respond, she hung up. An hour later, Mom called. She wasn't angry. That would have been easier. No. She sounded disappointed. The kind of disappointment that made my stomach twist. Megan told me you're not coming, she said. I just didn't expect you to be the kind of person who turns their back on family. That was it. That was the game. It wasn't about the birthday. It wasn't even about Megan. It was about control. And I had just broken the one rule I hadn't even realized I was following. The money wasn't just money. It was the price of admission, the cost of being included. I had always thought family was unconditional, that no matter what, they had my back. But in that moment, listening to Mom's quiet disappointment, I realized something brutal. My place in this family wasn't guaranteed. It was rented. Emily was the one who found it. She had been scrolling through social media late one night, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, when she came across Megan's latest posts. I was in the kitchen, rinsing out a coffee mug, when she called my name. There was something in her voice that made me pay attention. Megan had been posting about her hard times, talking about the struggles of being a single mom. But in between those posts were pictures that didn't add up, spa visits, expensive dinners, shopping bags from designer brands. The kind of lifestyle that didn't scream financial hardship. Emily turned her phone toward me, letting me see for myself. And there it was. The same woman who had been calling me every few weeks, sounding on the verge of tears, was now sipping champagne in what looked like a 5-star resort. My stomach twisted. I didn't say anything right away. Just sat down and scrolled through her posts. The further I went, the worse it got. Megan wasn't just getting by. She was thriving. And I was the idiot funding it. I felt played. Hard. I had spent years believing she needed my help. That without me, she and my niece would be struggling. But the truth was staring me in the face. She wasn't desperate. She was comfortable. And I had been the one making sure of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to every time she had called me, every time she had made me feel guilty for even hesitating. I needed answers. I needed to know if I was the only one she had pulled this on. The next day, I reached out to my cousin Kyle. We hadn't spoken in years, not since he had basically disappeared from the family. I had always assumed he just wanted distance, that he had grown tired of the drama. Now, I was starting to wonder if there was more to it. Kyle picked up after a few rings, his voice cautious but familiar. We made small talk for a minute, then I got straight to the point. I told him about Megan, about the money, about everything I had just found out. He didn't sound surprised. Instead, he let out a short, bitter laugh. The kind of laugh that says, I knew this was coming. Then he told me the truth. It wasn't just me. Megan and Mom had been running this game for years. I wasn't the first family member they had drained. I was just the latest. Kyle had gone through the same thing. The same guilt trips, the same fake emergencies. Until one day, he cut them off completely. And when he did, they turned on him, just like they were starting to turn on me. My stomach dropped as he talked. Every word lined up too perfectly with what I had been going through. The only difference was, Kyle had figured it out sooner. He had saved himself before it drained him completely. And now, I had to decide if I was willing to do the same. I sat at my desk, staring at my bank statements, scrolling through transaction after transaction. My fingers were clenched around the mouse, my jaw tight. The numbers didn't lie. Over 3 years, I had given Megan and Mom more than $118,000. $118,000. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I wasn't rich. I had a good job, sure, but I worked hard for my money. Emily and I had plans. A house upgrade, savings for the future. And here I was, sitting in front of the proof that I had been bleeding money into a black hole, all because I had bought into their lies. Anger burned in my chest as I kept digging. It wasn't just the money. It was how calculated everything had been. I started scrolling through old messages, emails, even voicemails from Megan and Mom. And that's when the realization hit me like a freight train. They had a script. The wording, the phrasing, the way they asked for money. It was all the same, like they had rehearsed it. And then I remembered what Kyle had said, how they had done the same thing to him. I compared the screenshots Kyle had sent me of his old messages with Mom and Megan against my own. It was the same routine, almost word for word. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't family helping family. It was a system, a scam within our own bloodline. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. How many others had they done this to? Had Dad known? What about our youngest brother, Owen? He had always kept his distance, never getting too involved in family drama. He was younger than me and Megan, lived in a different city, and had never taken sides. If anyone had a clear perspective, it was him. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight, but I knew I wouldn't sleep until I got more answers. I clicked over to my email and found an old chain with Owen. He worked in IT, cybersecurity. Actually, he had always been the smartest one in the family. The guy who could crack into anything and find out whatever he wanted. If anyone could help me figure out just how deep this went, it was him. I hesitated, then typed out a quick message, kept it short, told him I had some questions about Megan and Mom, that something wasn't adding up. Before I even hit send, my phone buzzed. Owen's name lit up the screen. I answered, and before I could even say hello, he got straight to the point. His voice was calm, but there was something different this time, a weight behind it. He wanted to meet, said he had something to tell me, something I needed to hear. I didn't know what to expect. Owen had always played neutral. If he was reaching out now, that meant one thing. This was bigger than I thought. I met Owen at a quiet little cafe on the edge of town. One of those places where the coffee's overpriced, but nobody bothers you. He was already at a corner booth when I walked in, a laptop in front of him, fingers drumming against the table. No small talk, no pleasantries, just a sharp nod before he turned the screen toward me. Look at this. At first, it was just a folder, labeled something vague, like docs, but inside, it was anything but random. Dozens of spreadsheets, all neatly categorized. He clicked one open, and my stomach dropped. Family financial plan. Owen kept talking, his voice low and tight. Mom had called him a few nights ago, said her laptop was acting up. Probably a virus, she figured. She asked if he could stop by and take a look. Normal enough. But while cleaning things up, he found this. A buried folder hidden so deep it was practically invisible. And in it, a breakdown of our entire family. Not by birthdays, not by milestones, by money. Each name had a column tracking past contributions, followed by projections. How much more could be pulled from each person? Payments, trends, expected increases. And then, highlighted in red, my name stood out with a note next to it. Bumped to $2,000 per month by Christmas. It wasn't just a pattern. It wasn't just manipulation. It was a business. And then came the worst part. Owen clicked on another tab labeled Triggers. I braced myself. It was a list. A disgusting, calculated list detailing what emotional angles work best on each person. For me, nostalgia. Bring up childhood. Talk about how I owed them for the past. For Kyle, shame. Remind him of the time he said no. Make him feel like a failure. For my cousin Rachel, guilt. Play the struggling single mom card. Every single person had been studied, played, worked over like an investment portfolio. Owen exhaled, running a hand through his hair. They've been doing this for years, he said, voice barely above a whisper. It's not just you, man. It never was. I sat there, fingers tightening into fists. My whole life, I thought family meant loyalty, that no matter what, they had my back. But staring at that screen, I saw the truth. I was never a brother, never a son. I was just a paycheck. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. The moment I left the cafe, I knew what had to be done. No hesitation, no second guessing. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the group chat with Mom and Megan, and typed out a message that had been years in the making. I'm done. No more money. Don't ask again. I hit send and locked my phone, stuffing it into my pocket like it was burning a hole there. I didn't need to see their responses. I already knew what was coming. I barely made it to my car before the buzzing started. First Megan, then Mom, then Megan again. I ignored them all, but the notifications kept lighting up my screen. By the time I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up the second I walked in, and I could tell by her face that she had already seen what was happening. They're losing it, she said, turning the screen toward me. And yeah, losing it was putting it lightly. Megan had gone nuclear, furious, raging texts about how I was selfish, heartless, how I was abandoning my own flesh and blood. She accused me of letting my niece suffer, of turning my back on the people who raised me. Mom, she was worse. Her messages weren't just angry. They were calculated. She knew exactly which buttons to press. Guilt, obligation, the family means everything speech. Even a few not-so-subtle jabs about Dad. About how he would be ashamed of what I'd become. I sat down, exhaling sharply. It was like watching a script play out in real time. Every word, every accusation. It was straight from that spreadsheet Owen had found. And the worst part, they weren't even hiding it. I didn't reply. I wasn't giving them the satisfaction. Instead, I turned my phone off completely, dropped it onto the table, and looked at Emily. Think they'll stop? I asked, already knowing the answer. She sighed. Not a chance. And she was right. A few days passed in silence. No calls, no texts. It almost felt too easy. And then Emily called me over to her laptop. You're going to want to see this. I leaned over her shoulder, and there it was, a GoFundMe page. Front and center, my mother's name, Megan's name. A dramatic title that made my blood boil. A mother and daughter abandoned. Help us survive. They had turned me into the villain. The story they wrote, completely fabricated. According to them, I had suddenly and cruelly cut them off, leaving them with nothing. They talked about my lavish lifestyle, about how I had forgotten my roots and left my struggling family behind. The donations were already rolling in. People, strangers, were sending them money, leaving comments about how heartless I was. Emily scrolled through the comments, eyebrows raised. They're really milking it. Some lady just donated $50 and called you a disgrace to your family. I clenched my jaw, hands curling into fists. This wasn't just desperate. This was war. A week after the GoFundMe disaster, I got a call from Uncle Mike. He wasn't someone I talked to often. He mostly kept his distance from family drama, but something in his voice told me this wasn't a social call. He wanted to meet up, said he had some things I needed to hear. We met at a diner just outside town, the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 80s. The vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee was burnt, and the waitress called everyone Han. Mike was already at a booth when I walked in, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. As soon as I sat down, he leaned in and got straight to it. "This isn't new," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "They've been running the scam for generations." I frowned, but before I could ask what he meant, he pulled out a worn leather notebook, flipping through a few pages before sliding it toward me. It was full of scribbled notes, old records, even some photocopies of letters. Turns out, this wasn't just a Megan and Mom thing. This was a family tradition, one that had started with my grandmother. Mike had been piecing it together for years. Same pattern, different decade. Find the family members with money, guilt-trip them into supporting the rest, and if they refused, they were exiled, blacklisted, turned into villains. Dad had been one of the few who escaped, mostly because he kept his distance. But others weren't so lucky. Mike himself had been the golden goose of his generation, the one expected to bankroll everyone else. When he finally put his foot down, they smeared him, cut him off, made sure no one in the family spoke to him again. "They make you feel like you're the bad guy," he said, shaking his head. "But the second you stop paying, you stop existing." As if that wasn't bad enough, he had one more bomb to drop. Megan wasn't just running the scam-on family. She was pulling the same thing at work. Mike had a buddy in finance, someone who had recently come across Megan's name. Apparently, she had been borrowing money from co-workers for months, spinning sob stories about medical bills, car repairs, whatever it took. And just like with family, she never paid any of it back. "She's got a whole network of suckers," Mike said, "and she's milking every single one." I sat back, gripping my coffee cup, my stomach twisting. This wasn't just manipulation. This wasn't just guilt-tripping. This was a full-scale con. I had thought cutting them off financially would be the end of it, that they would move on, find someone else. But now, looking at the wreckage Megan had left behind, I realized something else. This wasn't over. Not even close. I spent the next few days gathering everything. Bank statements, old text messages, screenshots from Megan's social media. Every piece of evidence that proved what she had been doing. Then, with a deep breath, I sent it all to the HR department of the company she worked for. Within 24 hours, I got my answer. Megan was fired. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. First, the GoFundMe page was shut down. Someone must have reported it, maybe a donor, maybe someone from her job, but it didn't matter. The campaign was flagged for fraud, and all the money she had scammed from people, gone. Then came the phone calls. Mom left me a voicemail, so long it cut off halfway through, launching into another right after. Her voice, usually sweet and composed, was now filled with venom. She ranted about how I had turned my back on family, how I had destroyed Megan's future. She went on and on about how I had embarrassed them, how people were talking, how I had made them look like scammers, like they hadn't been exactly that. Megan tried texting at first. When I didn't reply, she switched to insults, accusations, desperate threats about how I was ruining her life. Then she sent me a screenshot of her empty bank account. I blocked her, but the real kicker came a few days later, in the form of an email from Mom. No apologies, no acknowledgments of what had happened, just one simple line. "You betrayed your family." That was it. No explanations, no regret, just another attempt to twist a knife, to make me feel guilty for finally standing up for myself. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally closing my laptop. That night, Emily and I sat out on the back porch, a bottle of wine between us. The air was cool, the distant hum of crickets filling the silence between us. "How do you feel?" she finally asked, watching me over the rim of her glass. I thought about it for a moment. The anger, the frustration, the years of guilt that had kept me tethered to them. Lighter, I admitted, like I can finally breathe. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. They'll probably try again, you know. I nodded. Yeah, but I'm done. For the first time in my life, I meant it. I wasn't their golden goose anymore, and I never would be again.